Hey guys, Toby Vance here. Welcome back to the Lost History of Eden. We are doing our series on establishing the facts in science. As I stated in my introductory videos, considerations and fact versus theory, which, by the way, if you haven't seen those, make sure you check those out first. You want to look at those before you jump over here into this series. They just kind of lay a little bit of groundwork that'll help you understand better where we're coming from. But we're trying to establish the factual evidence for good science, the science that's legitimate. We don't want to go off the rails as our two extremes have done. If you're not sure what our two extremes are, again, check out our considerations video. That's where I discuss it. But in essence, we have an extreme on one end in terms of looking at the Bible and using it for history, archaeology, and science. We got one extreme which rejects science completely, the biblical literalist, the creation scientist. They throw out pretty much all the scientific evidence, including very good scientific evidence, things that establish evolution, things that establish the 4.5 billion year age of the earth. They just toss those out. They try and shoehorn a literal interpretation of the Bible into science, believing the earth is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old, which obviously there is just a ton of evidence that that's not the case. And also tend to reject evolution, which is something else we have pretty firmly established in science. So we're looking at the evidence for those things. We also have the other extreme, the biblical critical theorist who pretty much reject everything in the Bible, think it's all myth, fantasy. So we're going to be attacking that end of the spectrum too and showing where they're wrong and establishing some of the truth in the narratives of the Bible that we do know have taken place. And so we can try and merge the good solid science and the good solid biblical history into something that makes more sense and that doesn't fall off into these extremes. So that's what we're trying to do here. This video, we're looking at the age of the earth. So this is our first in the series. It's going to be looking at evidence that the earth is 4.5 billion years old. And what we're going to be looking at in this video is evidence from geology, which all three of our videos are going to be evidence from geology because geology firmly establishes that the earth is 4.5 billion years old. We're going to see that the biblical literalists try and explain the entire geological timescale as having been laid down during the 1 year of Noah's flood. They make the bold claim that all of those layers, which we know to be millions of years old, they try to claim all of those were deposited as sedimentary layers during 1 year of Noah's flood. Okay. We're going to see that is just an absolutely ludicrous explanation. There's so much evidence in the geological record that shows that these structures and formations we see within the geological timescale were not formed in 1 year. They could not have been formed in 1 year. There's absolutely no way. And so that's what we're going to be kind of looking at in this series. And this first one we're looking at are what we call unconformities. They're breaks in the layers that we see in the geological time scale. It'll make more sense as we go in and explain it. But unconformities are periods where there was a long period interval between two of the layers, and we see evidence for that. So there's no way they were deposited at the same time during 1 year. A layer was laid down and then there's a break for millions of years and then another layer was laid down. We have evidence for that, and so and it proves that this whole thing could not have been deposited in one event like the flood of Noah. So that's what we're looking at today. Okay, let's jump right into it and look at the evidence for unconformities.
Okay, so we're talking about problems with flood geology. Okay, what is flood geology? First, let me just explain real quickly this idea that creationists have so you can have an understanding of it and why it's so important to creationism and why we can use science to show that it's not true. Creationism tells us uh, that the earth is only 6 to 10,000 years old. Now, that is the form of creationism that we call young earth creationism. So, according to young earth creationism, the earth's only 6 to 10,000 years old. Now, there's a problem with that. Scientists have dug down into the earth and found all of these layers, okay, these geological layers that we've labeled and dated. And those layers, um, from the standpoint of science, seem to show that the earth has been around for billions of years. So young earth creationists have to in some way account for these layers and explain them. Okay? So they do that by trying to invoke Noah's flood from the book of Genesis in the Bible. And in that claim, they claim that in that worldwide flood, all of these layers, particularly of the Phanerozoic eon, were all deposited during the 1 year of Noah's flood that the book of Genesis tells us about. Now, the book of Genesis tells us that the flood lasted from the very first day the rain started till the day that Noah walked off the ark was a little bit over a year. Um, so we're talking about a period of time of approximately a year. So they claim that all of these deposits occurred during that 1 year of the flood. Those turbulent, churning waters of the worldwide global flood churned up all of this dirt, sediment, vegetation, dead animals that it had killed. And over time, as the flood calmed down, the flood waters calmed, then all of this stuff began to deposit on the bottom of this massive ocean that had been created, worldwide ocean, by the flood. And those sediments settling buried all of those dead animals, fossilized them, and that's why we get what looks like these layers that creationists claim aren't millions and billions of years old. Now, on the surface of it, this sounds somewhat reasonable. Okay, maybe a large flood could deposit all of these sediments. The problem with that is when we start looking at characteristics of the geological layers and the different strata within the geology of the earth, we start seeing features that do not fit with rapid deposition of sediments. There are some characteristics in the geological layers that look like they could have been formed by very catastrophic events, massive burials of animals that were fossilized. Um, we find lots of different fossils and trees and things like that that were buried. So those things look like they could be the result of huge catastrophes. But we also find within the geological layers characteristics and features that could only have taken a very long time to form. So these characteristics disprove flood geology because really all we need to do is find one feature or one characteristic that had to have taken a long time to form, and with that one feature we falsify flood geology, because according to flood geology everything in the geological record had to have been formed through this massive, turbulent, catastrophic flood. But in the use of science and in the science of geology, we have discovered many features in the geological record that either couldn't have been formed in the middle of a flood or would have required massive amounts of time to form. So we're going to, in this series, take a look at just a few of those, okay? And we're going to start out in this first presentation to look at one of them that we call angular unconformities. Now, what are unconformities? Unconformities are locations in the geological scale where there's been a very large passage of time between layers. We actually have three of them. We have an angular unconformity, we have nonconformities, and we have disconformities. Now, we don't have time to look at all three, so we're only going to look at one. And for the purposes of what we're looking at, the angular unconformity, which is the one we're going to look at, serves the purpose of showing and illustrating how unconformities disprove flood geology. So let's look at an angular unconformity and how it forms. The very first step that occurs is you get deposition of sedimentary layers. Now, how does this occur? It can occur from a large sea or a large lake in ancient times that was just sitting there, as lakes and seas do, and depositing all of the dirt and debris and such that gets dumped into a sea or a lake by rivers and wind and things like that. You can think about current seas and lakes like the Great Lakes in the northern United States, or the Black Sea, or the Caspian Sea, or the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, just like today in ancient times, we had large seas and lakes. And those lakes would sit there, and during the process of sitting there over hundreds and thousands and millions of years, they would deposit these layers of sediment. So that's the first step in the formation of an angular unconformity. Over time, however, those waters would recede and leave dry land with these sedimentary layers that would ultimately harden. Takes us to the second step in the formation of an angular unconformity. And in the second step, we now have these layers that are hardened, solidified, and have been sitting there for a long period of time. And now the pressures of tectonic plate movement, which occurs, we have all of these plates on the planet that are moving around, and this movement causes the earth, portions of the earth, to buckle as these plates collide together and push against each other. And so through this pressure, you get these sediments buckling and folding over a long period of time. Now, it takes a long time for this to happen because tectonic movement is very slow. Plates move, geological plates move at roughly the length of your fingernail, the distance of the length of your fingernail every year. So this is really slow movement. So it would require literally hundreds of thousands and even millions of years for this kind of folding to take place. So over time, you get this deformation and this folding and this buckling that occurs. That takes us to the third step. After the folding occurs, you have this folded area that is now on the surface, no water on top of it. And because it's exposed to the surface, it's now exposed to the processes of erosion, wind, sandstorms, rain, water. All of those forces of erosion begin to wear that area down. And it wears it down until you get roughly a flat surface. Okay, as you can see here. Now the folded area went all the way up here. But all of that is gone now because the processes of erosion over a long period of time has worn it down. Now you know that erosion takes place over a long period. That amount of earth is not going to go away quickly just through wind and sand and rain blowing on it. It's going to take, again, hundreds of thousands and millions of years to occur. And that takes us to step number 4. In the fourth step, we now have those seawaters returning. And that happens over time. You have the recession of seawaters and then the advancement of them again. That's a geological feature that occurs many times. Waters will recede and then they'll return again. So over thousands or millions of years, these waters returned again and formed another sea here. And during that process, more layers were deposited on top of this eroded area. Now, once that occurs, again, those seawaters recede. You're now left with an open area here. And ultimately, this area becomes exposed where we can see it. And we see this layer here with these layers that are sideways or slanted, and they just run right into horizontal layers where they stop. And that is where the unconformity. So this here is the angular unconformity, okay, this line right here. We call it an unconformity because we know that at this point in the layers, there is a massive gap in time between this occurring down here and this occurring up here. We have a gap here, okay, and that's why we call it an unconformity. And we know, based on those 4 steps we just looked at, that that gap is massive. Millions, tens of millions, and even hundreds of millions of years for all of this to have occurred. Just so you don't think geologists are making this up, here is a real angular unconformity as you would see it out in real Earth time. Here you can see there's the line of the unconformity. Below that you have the slanted layers. At one point in time these layers were flat because these are sedimentary layers that were deposited by an ancient sea. Over time they deformed and they folded. You can see because of the thickness of this, that fold would have covered a huge area. All of that is gone now. It's eroded away. You can just imagine calculating this curve out here, how much earth has been worn down here to get to this level here. And that's an amount of earth that would have required millions of years of time to erode away. After that, these layers here that are horizontal were deposited on top of it. So we have this unconformity right here. So what we conclude from this is we have a feature in the geological record which there is no possible way that this could be formed within the 1 year of Noah's flood. And we have unconformities all over the earth. These things are not uncommon. They are everywhere. And they prove once and for all that this earth was not flooded in a large worldwide global flood, but instead that these layers have been formed over millions and billions of years.
Okay, so you see unconformities are formations that it is impossible for them to be formed in a year. Just can't do it, okay? These formations have to take millions of years to form. There's no other way to explain it. So it establishes very firmly that the flood geology model of the geological timescale is erroneous. It's just something that does not fit with the evidence we clearly see. Okay, we got 2 more videos in this series. Make sure you check them out. If you haven't already checked out our series on evolution, check that out too. And if you're just getting started, you want to make sure you get over and see our introductory videos first. Those 2 videos are the video on considerations, which goes into the background to the argument I'm trying to make here, and establishes all of the different perspectives and where we're coming from. So make sure you watch that, and also watch the theory versus fact video, okay? And if you haven't seen that one, that establishes some groundwork that helps to make more sense about some of the things we're talking about, and especially these science videos. Okay, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hang on because we got a lot more coming. And tune in and you'll find more videos coming up as the weeks go on. So make sure you're checking in, make sure you're catching up on whatever you've missed. Take care. We'll see you around.